Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Chalice. I'm one of the outreach coordinators, specifically for event planning and event coordination. I'm really glad to be here. I'll go to Vivi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vivi Vu. I'm also one of the outreach coordinators, but then I focus more on social media and marketing and media engagement. I'll send it to Erin.
Morning, everyone. So nice to see you. My name is Erin O'Flaherty, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for ConnectOC/Partners for Wellness. And I run the Cultural Arts and Mental Health program for diverse communities and isolated populations, and look forward to touching more on that later. And I believe Joy is our last
Yeah, Joy popped on and then she dropped off, so she may be back in a minute here, but for now we'll keep it moving in the interest of time. But Joy is another colleague of ours and does a lot of great work as our, if I remember correctly, outreach coordinator, right? I'm still getting used to we've revamped things here at ConnectOC, so I'm still trying to remember what all the new roles and responsibilities are. So all that to be said, good to have you again. Good to have you all join us. So, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at different pathways to mindfulness and mindful practice. And one of the first things that comes to mind for me, something I've personally done a bit of digging on, is is the way in which faith practices from all and from a variety and really all faith traditions have this capacity to give to us or to impart to us mindful experience or mindful disposition or the features of what we would call mindfulness, right? We'll talk a little bit about what that is in just a bit here. But I'm really excited then to introduce our speaker, Mike Mullard. I'll give Mike an opportunity to introduce himself a little bit more, but I've gotten to know Mike here and there over the last several years and have really enjoyed knowing him, really enjoyed his person, his wisdom, his humor, and his friendship, even though we don't get to see each other as often as I might like. But that being said, without further ado, Mike, I'll let you share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go from there. Mike is also going to lead us through, in the spirit of our topic today, a mindful exercise to kind of get us moving. But Mike, why don't you introduce yourself to the people?
Like you, I always forget to unmute. And I wind up by speaking for half a minute, before someone says, Mike, turn on your microphone.
Mike, you're Mike.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Mike Mullard, as David said, and I'm longtime employee of County of Orange Healthcare Agency. And it's really a pleasure to be here this morning with you all, and nice to meet some new friends. I didn't recognize anyone's name, so that's a good thing. I always love to meet new friends and meet new people, make new friends. So that's a cool thing. David asked me to kind of speak along with Aaron, just given my background in mindfulness practice, which is both secular and religious. So, and I kind of, come from both of those areas. I've actually used mindfulness in my practice for decades, teaching it to clients and even clients with severe and persistent mental illness, and just have had some outstanding and really mind-blowing results from teaching mindfulness to even clients who are severely mentally ill. So, and I think we're going to be able to, talk about that a little bit in the conversation. So it's just a little bit about me. Like I said, I've been practicing mindfulness for probably close to 50 years. So it's been a long, long time. It started when I was uh, in my early teens. So what I'd like to do, first of all, before we start, I'd like you to put into the chat. Here's a question. Do you have a mindfulness practice currently? I just want to see who the audience is here. Just put yes or no. if you have a mindfulness practice currently. I'm guessing a lot of people do. Okay, yeah. Yes, and lots of daily prayer. I totally agree, Dallas. Me too. Yeah, kind of, yes. Okay. Yes, but not terribly consistent. Okay, cool. All right, good. So this is really good because we've got a group of people here um, who have a lot of experience in mindfulness. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir, which is really good. And what I want to do is just do just a very brief, like a 5 minute mindfulness exercise that's really body focused. And we're going to be starting basically with doing some deep breathing, which is always a really good way to start. And then we will be starting with increasing awareness, starting in our feet and then kind of moving all the way up our body. So this is basically an exercise in shamatha or increased focus as opposed to vipassana, which is kind of more of a technical way of saying moving from the focus into the wisdom. So we're only going to do just kind of like a very focused meditative practice this morning. So if I can have everyone just kind of sit back in your chair and just let the cares of the week go. Today is Friday, and some of us may have had a very heavy and difficult week, and just let the cares of the week begin to go as you move from your head down into your body. Okay. Just start to become aware of your body and all the different ways that you are embodied. You might want to begin to feel what it feels like to be sitting in your chair, feeling feeling your back against the back of the chair and feeling your thighs and your buttocks sitting in the chair, hopefully relaxing, maybe feeling your feet on the ground. And what I'd like us to begin to do is to just kind of breathe in for a count of 4, and you can time that to your heartbeat if you're aware of your heartbeat. And then try and make the out breath longer than the in breath, even up to a count of 8 if you can. And just take a few moments to become aware of your breath, making your out breath longer than your in breath. By making your out breath longer, what we're doing is actually activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest nervous system. This is going to tell the body to relax. And as you continue to lengthen your exhale, you can, if you'd like, and you can either do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed. Either way is fine. Just bring your awareness down into your feet and just notice all of the sensations in your feet. Maybe you might feel tingling or heaviness or warmth. And as you become more aware of the sensations in your feet, just let your awareness move up from your feet, up into your ankles and your calves and your knees and your thighs. Just notice the sensations there in your legs. And now allow your awareness to move up into your lower torso, in the area from your upper thighs all the way to the base of your rib cage. Maybe you might feel heaviness and warmth, tingling. All of those sensations are signs that the body is relaxing and becoming more aware. And now allow your awareness to move up into your upper torso, your shoulders, and down your arms. Become aware of any tension that you're carrying in your shoulders. And if you're aware of any tension, just let it go. And now allow your awareness to move up into your neck, into your jaw, into your forehead, and into the crown of your head. Just become aware of sensations all throughout your body. Hopefully you're feeling that sense of heaviness and warmth. Heaviness is a sign of muscular relaxation. Warmth is a sign of vascular relaxation. And if you feel any tension anywhere in your body, just allow it to fall down like drops of water into the floor. And just become aware of that spot within you, that deep spot at the core and center of your being that is perfectly aware, that's in the present moment, that is filled with unconditional love, compassion, care, and nurturing. And just rest in that sense of wellness and well-being for a moment. Maybe feeling a sense of gratitude for the day. For our time together. And for all the gifts that we've received. And when you're ready, knowing that you can return to this lovely, beautiful space anytime you want, I'd like to ask you to open your eyes or bring your awareness slowly back into the room with us. You can maybe move around a little bit, stretch. Bring your awareness back up into your head and prepare for our discussion. So thank you all. Can all of you put what that was like for you into the chat? It'd be interesting to see the responses. And I love Michelle's comment. She says, yes, 2 hours of morning prayer while listening to Latin Gregorian chants, then breath work and gratitude practice. Nice. Nice. Good. Oh, good. Great. I'm glad it was a positive experience for you guys. That's great to know. And see how it increases your awareness of what's going on inside your body. So Pam said, so it made me aware that I need to rest this weekend. That is always, always, always a side benefit of meditation or contemplation or mindfulness practices. It really increases our own self-awareness, you know. Oh, Bhuvana is here. Hi, Bhuvana. Great to see you. Great. Lovely to see you all. Okay, David, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. I'm just going to take a very mindful sip of my coffee.
Good idea.
And then I might need someone else to take over. I'm a little too relaxed. I'm going to sound a little bit less like I normally do, more like I'm on NPR. Um, but Mike, thank you. That was fantastic. That was really nice. You know, I there's some parts of that for me personally that were really nice integration. This format of a body scan I sometimes use with clients as well, but your experience and expertise really shine through in just the way that you directed us to notice a little bit more and become more aware of our experience for its own sake, just increasing our awareness, our capacity to notice what's happening. As I find myself able to both have this conversation, and yet I'm still very aware of my body in a way that is not as common without this kind of intentional practice. So thank you. It was great. Um, and so, a great segue, almost kind of working in reverse here. Now we've done some mindful practice. And Mike, how would you describe mindfulness? If someone were to ask you what mindfulness is, how would you characterize it or describe it?
I was looking for John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, and I thought, yeah, here's what he says.
Mm.
So John Kabat-Zinn, many of you are aware that he is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction from, I believe it was Massachusetts General Hospital. He started up this training program probably 40 years ago now. And his definition is one of the best that I've ever seen. He says mindfulness is awareness. It's awareness, okay? It's awareness that arises through paying attention. Okay? So we're paying attention to something on purpose. So in other words, we have a goal in mind. There's a specific reason that we're doing this. In the present moment, meaning our mind is here and focused. And finally, non-judgmentally. And then he says, and then I sometimes add, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom.
Mm.
So that's his. And I can't think of a better definition of mindfulness than that for me either. The one thing that I might add is he says, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom. And I would say, for me personally, as a means of touching the transcendent in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I especially am fascinated with the kind of what seems like saying the same thing in a few different ways, right? Awareness, paying attention on purpose. In some respects, those all seem like a way of saying the same thing, but they really do speak to a kind of layered, like I'm becoming aware. In my intention to be aware, I am paying attention, right? Um, and doing so on purpose. We have a degree of awareness in our day-to-day lives. We pay attention to all sorts of things, but the on purpose part, right, really kind of caps it off. And specifically, not just paying attention to what might happen later in the day or what happened last week, but to the present moment. Yeah. Do you mind commenting a little bit more about that idea there, that definition, that those different aspects of that? And particularly, I'm thinking about too, you know, this kind of triple awareness, paying attention on purpose, the
Yeah.
present moment, and then we can maybe move into the idea of non-judgmentally, what that's about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. While you were talking about that, I was thinking about kind of like my other kind of spiritual practice.
Mm.
I'm an Oblate of Saint Benedict. And I know David knows what that means, but for those of you who don't know, it means I'm kind of a lay member of a Benedictine community up in Big Sur. And part of that is I really kind of try and live by, and I just did a talk on this. I did like an hour and a half retreat on this a couple weeks ago. Part of the Benedictine vows, which are uh, stability, obedience, and that's the one that I want to kind of focus on because it really kind of ties into this kind of a meditation or mindfulness aspect. When we think about what does obedience mean in our present life, that is a very highly charged word, right? It's like when I think of obedience, I'm thinking of like a secular authority and things like that. And there's such a like a negative kind of a connotation to that. But you go back and you look at the root of that particular word in Latin, the word obedience comes from ob audire. And ob means toward, and audire means to listen.
Mm,
So at its very core, obedience is quite a bit like mindfulness. It's a deep listening toward someone
mm,
in the deepest possible way. So in other words, when I'm seeing clients in spiritual direction or in therapy, I'm doing my best to be obedient to them by practicing that mindful awareness. I'm listening toward them. I'm listening non-judgmentally to what they're saying. I'm listening with all of my attention and I'm listening purposefully.
mm, mm,
So to me, that's just kind of like a really beautiful way of showing how mindfulness and and obedience are very much similar because we're all obedient to something, right? If we're married, we are obedient and hopefully mutually obedient to our spouses. If we have a job, we have to be kind of obedient to our supervisors, you know, things like that. But there is this element of deep listening, deep attention, deep love, and deep care that kind of goes along with that. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think
You
that's,
see
I think
how
that,
they parallel. It's like this deep listening. It's like almost a moving toward oneness with your client
mm,
on a certain level.
yeah, and it's got me thinking too, Mike, I think that's it's really shifting or coalescing how I've been thinking about the subject, right? Because in some ways, there's a sense of deep listening in the idea of monastic obedience or in the idea of how I might relate to the person in front of me, right? Whether it be a client as a clinician or just as one human being to another, this approach of deep listening, is as the aim, as the goal, but also in some ways the process. But I'm also thinking about that when I practice things that deliver a mindful experience, right? I engage in mindful practices, whether they are the secular mindfulness or something faith-based or whatever it might be, whatever delivers those things that I think, again, brilliantly John Kabat-Zinn highlighted in his definition. I am also engaging in a deep listening to my own experience,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
My body, to my emotions, to my thoughts, to my inner world. I think about the nudge judgmental piece. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that because it's got me thinking about how often I'm, if I'm sitting with someone who's going through a hard time, you hear things like, well, I know I'm not supposed to be thinking that way, or I know I'm not supposed to be feeling this, or I don't like this part of my experience, right? The judgment, the path of judgment. But what that means is that I can't derive any meaningful information from that part of my experience if I refuse to listen to it, right? If I refuse to acknowledge it and be open to it. If I can slow down and engage in that deep listening to my own experience,
Yeah,
then I can gather some information, right? Hear a
yeah,
little bit more clearly what that part of me is trying to say.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And David, why don't we have everyone put their comments
Yeah.
in the chat? So let's have everyone kind of enter into the conversation as we go along. We can highlight like comments and things like that, or if you guys have questions about what we're talking about, put those in the chat as well, so we can have everyone kind of participate.
That would be
Yeah,
great. Yeah, if anybody has questions or just things that are connecting for you, things you're reflecting on, things you're noticing,
yeah,
we'd
for
love to
sure.
see that in the chat, and we'll incorporate that into the conversation. Mike, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about this idea of non-judgment. I'm thinking about both in the context of mindfulness more generally as we've been discussing it, but also thinking about your practice both as a therapist, as a spiritual director, your engagement in spiritual practices. I know that you have an appreciation for the Christian desert tradition, right? And that one of the things that comes up quite frequently in the writings of the early desert monastics is this importance of non-judgment.
Mhm.
So wherever that leads you, I'd love to hear your comments on that, your thoughts on that.
So as I think about that, like the longer that I practice mindfulness, the more that my sense of awareness becomes expanded. Okay. And if you think about, has anyone ever heard of like James Fowler's stages of spiritual and faith development? Really, really interesting to look at. He basically says the more that a person enters into a spiritual practice, especially like mindfulness, the more that our awareness, our sense of openness and inclusion takes on the entire world. And it just kind of helps us look at the world in a kind of a mature manner so that we don't so I don't or I really work hard on not demonizing anyone. I mean, we're in a very highly charged political spectrum right now. And so many people I notice get caught up in literally demonizing a person. I mean, it's a one thing to disagree with policies, right? But when we actually go so far as to demonize, then that becomes a real issue. And for me, what I've noticed in my own practice over the course of the years that I am much more inclusive and accepting of everyone, not only those that I work with, but everyone that I meet on the street. And I notice it literally develops my sense of compassion.
Mhm.
And when one has that sense of compassion, then it seems like that compassion just kind of pushes out the judgmentalism. And it's really interesting. It's such an organic process. I've just noticed it in my life. It just kind of happens where 30 years ago, I would have, thought someone that disagrees with me politically, I would have had rather negative, thoughts about them. But now it's just like, okay, well, that's your view, and it may be different from mine, and that's okay. And God bless you, and I love you, and I accept you, even though we disagree. I'm not going to judge you for your particular beliefs. And that's literally come through, years of compassion meditation and deep mindful awareness.
Mm.
And not only that, it's helped me kind of accept all of the parts of myself
Mm.
too. So becoming much less judgmental about the different parts of myself that are split off that I don't necessarily like,
Mm.
you know, parts that maybe need healing
Mm.
and things like that. So it's just been incredibly powerful as a way for me to become more open to everybody, including myself, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I love that. It connects well to our last topic about a month and a half ago was emotions kind of from the ground up. And one of our panelists specifically was as I know that you, as I recall that you are as well, an IFS practitioner, a clinician who utilizes IFS, this idea of being able to connect with without judgment to all the various parts of myself, right? And to hear what they have to say and to give them space and attention and compassion and
Mhm.
care. Um, so I'm of a couple minds of direction. I love um, what you were just talking about, but I know that I'm also aware, and I think we're kind of naturally going there, but I'd love to bring the point home a little bit. As we've been talking today, this idea of different approaches to mindfulness, and a couple of those different approaches are are what we're talking about today, through the lens of art, but also through the lens of faith practices. And so I'd love to hear a little bit from you. You kind of started to touch on this, Mike, but how have you found faith practices to be an avenue towards mindful awareness, both personally, if you wouldn't mind, and then generally as you're working with clients or spiritual directees or whatever it might be.
Sure, sure. I won't go too deeply into this because I want to allow other people time to kind of
Yeah.
maybe talk about that too. But
Sure.
I began I'm a lifelong practicing Catholic, very much into the contemplative tradition.
Mm,
Started getting into that, back in the late 70s.
mm,
And interestingly enough, I've also always been very much drawn to the Eastern traditions too. So kind of paralleling with that, kind of the Western kind of contemplative tradition, I've always also been very interested in Buddhism as
mm,
well. And so my experience is I've really been kind of working to integrate my Catholic meditation practice into kind of in also into a Buddhist framework, which is very interesting. And what's cool is I don't have any issues integrating them at all. I mean, my basic practice is awareness, and I mean that's what actually feeds me, awareness and compassion. And those two practices are in both the Catholic and the Buddhist. And so for me, it's very easy to integrate um, awareness practice
mm,
in both of those. And so, part of it for me is just kind of looking at both traditions and looking at the beauty of both of those and just kind of seeing how I can integrate them. And interestingly, the monastery that I'm involved with up in Big Sur, one of their one of their charisms or their gifts is interreligious dialogue.
mm,
So they host a lot of conferences with different faith traditions up there, and many of them are involved with the San Francisco Zen Center and Tassajara and different sorts of non-Christian traditions, which is really cool. So
excellent.
that kind of fits in kind of with my own um, my own interests.
Yeah. I'm curious, this might be a little chicken or egg question, but was someone like Thomas Merton an inspiration for you? Someone you
Sure.
discovered as you were discovering your own practice? How did that look for you? Because
Yeah.
for folks who are not sure, Thomas Merton was a Catholic monk, but also, especially later in his life, had a very robust dialogue on a personal level, but also in an interreligious and friendship level with the Buddhist tradition.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, he and the Dalai Lama were very good friends
mm,
before Merton accidentally died while he was giving a talk in Bangkok.
yeah.
And
Specifically on this subject, if I remember, right?
yeah, and this was in 1967, so it
Mm.
was a long time ago. Uh, so, and can you repeat what your question was, David?
Oh yeah,
Oh, Merton. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I discovered Merton very early on. And, since that time, I've actually led, multiple reading groups on Merton's, work and things like that at my parish, which has been really fun.
Um, great, great.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Um, so maybe we talked a little bit about so there's some of the merging, right, of how for you faith practices and um, well, Michelle, great, thank you. Um, Michelle says, as for Eastern religions, I so agree. I'm raised Catholic. Mary is my greatest mentor. But I also respect the I Ching to remove folks from emanations to get immediate download and or guidance. The
Yeah.
one string that goes through all religions is the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah.
Biblically based and aligned with earlier books of wisdom too, the Tao Te Ching and so on. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I um I'm wondering too, Mike, so I think we've talked just, I mean, Michelle's fantastic comment, your perspective, Mike, and experience about the ways that um, a, a, a mindful practice and faith um, practices intersect. I'm wondering that both, for you, um, as uh, as um, as a practitioner, but also as someone who is both a clinician and a spiritual director. And
Mm.
maybe I'll ask you to comment a little bit more about that role, if you wouldn't mind,
Mhm.
what that looks like for you and what drew you to that. But um, after that, as you comment on that, I'd be curious to hear, are there ways in which, when we think about mindful practice or secular mindfulness and
Mhm.
faith practice, are there ways that they aren't compatible, in the ways that they're distinct, or um, maybe they have some departures from one another? Any thoughts about that or comments about that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we always have to be very careful when we're working in a secular setting.
Mm,
Uh, Most importantly is that it's really contingent upon us to not uh, put forth our own agenda or our own particular tradition on anyone else, no matter what faith that we practice, right? But yet, at the same time, I think one of the things that's incredibly important, too, is to find out if our client, our patient, does belong to a faith tradition, because we know that uh, there's been just an explosion of research over the last 40 years about the benefits of being not only spiritual but also religious. And it's very interesting because not only is it a way of uh, coping practice, but it literally actually extends life. There's
mm,
research that shows that for people who are involved in a religious and spiritual tradition, life can be extended by up to 7 years,
mm,
which is very interesting. And part of that is because people who are involved are tend to make healthier choices and things like that. But as far as where they are not compatible, it to me it's of course it all depends on the client. If the client
yeah.
is open to it, great. If the client is not open to it, then that's something that we absolutely stay away from.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, that's
from a
good.
secular standpoint, that I think that also applies in terms of our clients being open to mindfulness practice. If they're not open to it, then that's something that I certainly don't push on them. You know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hear in that merely kind of sounds like, for you, a lot of the points of distinction or points of departure. On one hand, there are, you know, established in the research benefits to both spirituality and even religiosity, or
Mhm.
having a meaningful religious connection.
Yeah.
Um, but on the flip side, we really want to make sure that we are, in terms of engaging in our own practice of mindful awareness and non-judgment, meeting folks where they're at, right? And
Mhm.
recognizing that, you know, this has been true in my own experience too. I might have a client who says, "Yes, I'm a person. I have a faith. My faith is important to me." I ask often the follow-up question, is there a way you'd like to see that incorporated in our work together? And
Mhm.
some folks are like, yes, I want that to be part of everything we do. And other folks are like, no, I'm here for something distinct, and that's what I'm here for,
Mhm.
and and
For sure.
and honoring that and being mindful, to use the term, of really setting aside my own agenda and expectations in order to engage with both respecting the client for who they are, the person for who they are, really, if it's not, for those of us who are not clinicians, really the person in front of me for who
Yeah.
they are, but also finding ways to connect with things that might be resources for them, right? Here, thinking a little bit about the aim and mission of Connect C, really, we're not just thinking about external resources towards mental wellness, the resources that might be out there in the community, but what resources does a person have for them
Exactly. Yeah.
in their inner world, in their relationships, and so on, that can help support their mental wellness and mental thriving.
For sure.
Yeah.
And spirituality is such a huge means of coping.
Yes.
The research is so abundantly clear and compelling. It's probably one of the best coping skills. And I think to recognize that, I think about maybe 15 years ago, the American Psychological Association, whose guidelines I subscribe to, uh, basically stated to psychologists that if you are not honoring your client's spiritual tradition or practice, then you're practicing unethically.
Mhm.
which is very interesting because
Yeah.
you recall how for how many years there was this like big wall separating
Yeah.
spirituality from psychology. And I think it's only because the research is so abundantly clear now that there is this real move to integrate uh, spirituality in therapy if the client is open to it, or at least supporting their own practice.
Yeah. 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 There's something, for so long, spirituality and religion, at least in certain circles in the psychological world, were regarded as signs of a neuroses, right?
Right.
But now the evidence has made it clear that what folks have known for a long time, these are meaningful sources of coping, meaningful engagement with faith and religion can be a meaningful way of imparting some of the stuff we're talking about, mindful awareness and
Right.
other supports to mental wellness. But it's also engaging with and and respecting a core part of who the person in front of us is in their day-to-day experience, right? And so yeah, there's something really powerful about that. I'm wondering, as we're talking about this, Mike, we talk about, of course, for many to engage in faith practices, the message may seem like presumes you must have a faith that you ascribe to or a faith experience. And I know for some folks, part of their reluctance in this regard is maybe their experiences with faith, especially faith institutions often. I wonder if you have any thoughts about if engaging in these kinds of practices, engaging in faith practices as a means towards mindful awareness might be an avenue for folks to re-engage faith who maybe are more reluctant uh, towards the institutional elements of religion.
Yeah. 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 And I want to acknowledge Spot's comment.
Yeah.
Spot says in the queer community, many of us come with deep wounds from a forced experience with
Yes.
religion. Leaving religion was the most beneficial thing that I've ever done for myself.
Yes.
And Spot, I just want to acknowledge that. And sadly, that's very true.
Yeah.
Sadly, there can be abuse in religion, and and so oftentimes, hopefully, what will happen is that when a person leaves a particular faith, they become maybe more spiritual per se without being religious. And if a person that I were seeing had that experience, then there's so much that could actually be done. I might work with them, first of all, to help them heal those particular, wounds and not encouraging them in any way to experience a deeper faith, but also to look at, okay, well, how does spirituality then kind of help me grow? In other words, where do I find meaning in life, right? Because to me, finding meaning there's so much in terms of that. To me, is a significant part of spirituality, is finding deep meaning in life in a particular way. And I think using mindfulness as a practice, it can certainly help us kind of develop that inner sense of awareness. It, for me, from my standpoint, speaking personally, I've been meditating, for so long that I sometimes I look out at the world and I just being a miracle. It's just an absolute miracle. The beauty of nature, the beauty of the people that I meet, that I interact with. It just seems so miraculous. And I think that's just come from my own kind of sense of mindfulness practice. So that for me has helped me derive just a huge amount of meaning about what life is. Um, and I think that's certainly possible for people who don't have any religious background at all, right? So
Yeah.
certainly mindfulness can help that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for many folks who leave a religious tradition, right? That and particularly thinking about our target audience here of youth and young adults for whom that might is really statistically is increasingly true, right? Leaving at least in an institutional or formal way some kind of religious um, uh, community or background, but there's often still a tension in, well, there might be things I still believe or hold to be true, or be things I still find meaning in, or ways I want to or want to feel connected to the transcendent, to God, to whatever it might, to however you want to characterize that. How do I hold these things in tension? How do I honor the wounds that I have experienced that have led me to make the decision for my own health and well-being to move away from at least an institutional religious experience, but at the
Yeah.
same time, meaningfully encounter those parts of that experience that may still hold meaning for me. And so I
Yeah.
hear what you're saying, Mike, that some of what we're talking about here, engaging in perhaps faith practices or in mindful practices, or as faith practices as a means to mindfulness or an avenue to mindfulness. Um, and keeping in mind to what you mentioned earlier, also as a means to encountering the transcendent, right, in our lives. This might be an avenue, what we're talking about here, to honoring both the wounds that someone might have experienced from a religious experience or a religious community or institution, while at the same time encountering those parts that still hold meaning for them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
To me, there's lots of different ways to encounter the transcendent, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced that it always has to be through a religious tradition.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. Well, maybe this might be a good time. First, I also want to say thank you, Swat, for your comment because I think we were of the similar minds in some respects. I hadn't seen your comment when I asked the question to Mike. I think it came through right as I was right before, right as I was asking the question. But I think it's an important part to consider that as we're talking about faith practices as a resource for folks, and for some folks, acknowledging they really are wholly connected to a religious tradition and community, and that provides great benefit to them. But for other folks, it's not the same. So, the, looking at other approaches to mindful awareness, and here I think I'd love to hear a bit more from you, Mike, and I want to connect with Aaron about how art has been an avenue for you towards mindful awareness. And then I'd love to hear, we'll check in with Erin too about the part of the Connect to See project she heads up and her experiences.
And Michelle, I want to thank you for your comment
Mm.
too. It's very nice. Yeah. Yeah. I'll keep good thoughts for you as you continue to write your healing books. That's great.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to write an afterword on my battle cry for humanity. I'll email it to you later.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike, what if you wouldn't mind, what's your yeah, faith-based practice can also be expanded to include spiritual-based practice, especially as it relates to Spot's comment. Yeah, yeah. It should be important to keep in mind too that when we're having this conversation, we're not specifically promoting religion itself,
Right.
although I myself am religious. Mike, you touched on your own religious background, but connecting here to avenues for youth and young adults to engage in mindful awareness, to become more aware of themselves, to develop greater self-compassion and compassion and awareness for the world and others around them, as a means towards supporting mental wellness and mental thriving. And there are many avenues, I think, as we've talked about, to that, whether it be specifically faith-based practices, more of a spiritual, more of a take a step back and more of a spirituality that maybe is less defined or less institutional, or
Yeah.
for folks who maybe don't connect with any element of religious experience, but can find in what might be called more secular mindfulness or meditation practices, a
Mhm.
way of connecting to all of these things that we're also talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any thoughts about that, Mike? Further thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a quick story that I'll
Yeah.
tell that is just it still blows me away when I think
Mm.
about it. So years ago, I was working with a young man um, who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia,
Mm.
and neat young man, probably 23 years old. And he had his psychotic break when he was about 16, so he was quite young. And being hospitalized was very traumatizing
Mm.
for him. And so he came to my clinic when he was probably about 20, I think. And he had always kind of been interested in mindfulness. And when he came to us, he was still kind of like he was still having some difficulty kind of recognizing where reality kind of ended and his psychotic experiences began. So we got him on medication, things like that. Fortunately, he was one of the ones that medication was quite effective for.
Mm.
But we started to talk about mindfulness, and he was like really, really interested in it. So he asked me more information about it and whatnot. And he asked me to like teach him mindfulness. So my first thought was, okay, but you know, the type of mindfulness I'm going to teach him was a very much outward oriented kind of focusing on the outer world instead of having him go in the inner world. And so we started to work on mindfulness practice. This kid took to mindfulness like a duck takes to water. I mean, I could not believe he became so good at mindfulness. And after about a year of doing it, one day in session, he said to me, and this still blows me away. He said, Dr. Mike, I now know that there is a space or a place within me of sanity that I can go to whenever I see all of these symptoms and crazy thoughts and crazy, you know, visual experiences that I'm seeing. I can stand back and go into that place
Mm.
and be sane, and I don't have to get caught up in the
Mm.
symptoms. So this kid got so good at mindfulness that he was able to stand back. His observing ego was so well developed that he was able to disengage from his psychotic symptoms and just kind of stand back and observe them.
Mm.
And he called that his place of sanity.
Um,
It was just amazing. And
that's a-
that's one of the things, to me, one of the best examples I've ever seen about how mindfulness, if entered into carefully with someone who has a diagnosis, can really be incredibly beneficial.
that's incredible.
It
That
is
really is.
incredible, you know?
It really is. We talk about, a foundational idea in both mindful practice and also in most faith tradition practices, prayer practices, and so on. If you dive into the great thinkers on those practices and traditions, is drawing a distinction between our experiences, our thoughts, our sensations, our memories, the images in our minds, our feelings and emotions, all of those kinds of things, and that part of us that can become aware of them. What's sometimes called, as you said, the observing ego, the observing self, self as context, noticing
Yeah,
self,
right.
whatever it might be, the self, right? And IFS.
Mhm.
Um, and these experiences and there's a kind of a general like, yeah, I can make sense of that, and my thoughts are not me, even though often we experience our thoughts or our emotions or our sensations as kind of, to use a term from a particular approach to therapy, is fused. I am my thoughts and feelings, so on, versus taking a step back and noticing them as an observer, right? um, but for that to be something that this young man was able to do relative to his, not just his typical thoughts and feelings and so on, but even those places where he experiences somewhat of a break with reality, right, during his
Yeah,
psychotic experiences, be able to
yeah,
take a step back from that actively in those moments and be an observer rather than getting um, grabbed along and taken with those things
yeah,
is powerful.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It really was.
Yeah.
It
And I
really was.
think, I also heard in your story this paired well, this capacity for this practice paired well with the fact that he took well to an antipsychotic medication that helped stabilize him and so on. So if I heard right, is that correct? Yeah,
Yeah, now when he was under stress, of course, his symptoms did
right,
increase. And when he
right.
was under stress, he would spend more time in mindfulness practice.
Yes, yeah,
And it's really interesting, kind of like
yeah.
what EMDR can do when a person has a psychotic diagnosis, and one can actually um, do bilateral stimulation
Mm,
with them and to kind of heal whatever is being triggered in
mm,
them. And then, interestingly enough, their psychotic symptoms decrease.
mm,
Right? It's not a cure, obviously,
right, right.
but it helps them cope and tolerate with their symptoms much more effectively. Right?
That right there might touch on something I think really important. Another important distinction for those who maybe are on board. When I have clients who are on board with mindful practice or folks I'm talking to or utilizing faith practices as a means to mindfulness, right? That sometimes it becomes a one for one, like I do this thing and my anxiety goes away. I do this thing and my depression will go away. I do this thing and my fill in the blank will go away. But really, that's while symptom reduction might be a down the line benefit of mindful practice, it really is not the intention. Really, the intention in mindfulness is simply moving towards a greater awareness of those experiences in my life and a recognition that I am not those experiences. I
Yeah,
am experiencing those things.
yeah.
Is that fair to
I
say?
I I might also add to that,
Mm.
like thinking along those same lines, to me, it's all about really developing a greater sense of emotional and spiritual maturity.
Yeah. Mm.
Because we know that um, one of the things that we know is that people who have difficulty with self-regulation, right, they get caught up in their feelings. We
Yeah.
oftentimes see that. Oftentimes, due to trauma, we oftentimes see that as uh, them being kind of, focused at an earlier stage of emotional development. For me, what I see in my own life is that practicing mindfulness has really has not only increased my coping, but it's helped me see things from a much more kind of a mature kind of level. And I think that's also something that mindfulness practice does. It really helps mature us as people, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good. I do want to come back around, Mike, to hear a little bit about your experience with art and art as a means to mindful awareness, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Um, we want to be sure to leave time for
Yeah.
anyone else, yeah, too.
Yeah.
But sure, I mean, one of the things, well, I I do, fortunately, I've been a lifelong musician, and also I got into the practice of painting or writing icons in the Orthodox tradition about maybe 10, 15 years ago. And that entire practice, what I found is because it's such a concentrative practice, there is just a real strong element of mindfulness, with it. And I think that's true of any kind of anything basically that we enter into with full attention, right? And the art of like painting an icon is literally a 22-step process, and each step in that process, it has a different kind of a meaning. And literally, when you're working with watercolor, which is basically what it is, or egg tempera, okay,
Mm.
you have to be really careful about how you apply the paint to the gessoed board, and you really have to have your full concentration all the way through. And what I find is that after I've been spending 6 or 8 hours painting, I'm incredibly relaxed. because although it's been a very concentrated process, my mind has been focused on one thing, and
Mm,
that's kind of creating this sense of beauty.
mm,
So for me, that's kind of what it's been about.
mm.
And I think that can hold true with any kind of art,
Yeah,
as a concentrative, practice.
yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Um, Aaron, I love to bring you in here and hear a little bit about what's connecting for you, especially in the context of art, and art practice as a means to mindfulness. But also, I'd love for you to share a bit about the part of our project that you oversee and what that has looked like and how you've seen some of this come into play for um, participants in some of the art workshops that you and teaching artists have led.
Oh, thank you so much, David. And yes, and thank you, Michael. All that I've heard so far in your presentation and the exercise and mindfulness was all very wonderful. And so I'm glad to add to this part of the conversation. And I began this cultural arts and mental health program a few years ago with a different organization called the Laguna Playhouse. And then have been with Partners for Wellness slash Connect OC for the last couple months. And gratefully, we've been able to work with a lot of the same organizations that we began with a couple years ago and to transfer them over without much of a break in programming. And essentially, the program is bridging the worlds of cultural arts and mental health. And we use that through several disciplines. And so we actually engage with visual arts, with music, improv, mental health writing and poetry, also photography and short film. And our target populations are the transitional age demographic, and especially those who have experienced dire life circumstances. So, our higher risk populations and diverse communities. And what we found is that the act of mindfulness is definitely very much engaged in our outreach. And the structure of the outreach is workshops that usually take place at the partner organization site. We have a team of specially trained teaching artists, and we work directly with these communities. And so, as when I began the program with the Playhouse, the title was Our Stories, and it was sharing their stories through these different disciplines. But interestingly enough, as I've transferred it to this organization, I've renamed it Mindful Expressions.
Mm,
And I do feel that that act of mindfulness is so relevant. And the structure of the workshops as we lead them is about an hour and a half. And the first usually 20 minutes is a mental health exercise or a mindfulness exercise. And so we do a similar breathing technique exercises and other things like positive self-affirmation words. And then the bulk of the workshop is engaging in the arts discipline. And then at the end, we have moments of reflection and sharing mental health resources. And so the program's rooted in three pillars, and it's social cognitive theories, so that that act of witnessing, absorbing, and replicating, positive behavior is how we are really connecting with the participants that we work with. And then also what I call caring for the caretakers. And
mm,
so we also work directly with program managers and counselors who are leading at these organizations and experience that vicarious trauma. And so we're able to share workshops directly with them as well. And then, and the third pillar is really the community building. And I'd like to touch on this a bit as we talk about mindfulness, because I think mindfulness we think too as a self expression or something that takes place within us. And one of the important things we've seen within working with our groups who are primarily those who have been in domestic violence shelters and foster care organizations, people who are in rehabilitation facilities who have experienced, human trafficking, people who are in transitional homeless shelters and different places like that. And so the the community building aspect is really important. And we also work with refugees and veterans. And as we've seen, like also we also set the tone with each workshop that it is about creating a safe space for ourselves and for each other. And just an interesting story. One of the first times we worked with an organization called Sabeel USA, and they worked with refugees, primarily Afghan refugees. And for our first workshop, we had a tremendous interest and participation. So we were due to have 50 people for a workshop in an evening. And as our teaching artist arrived, and they were setting up tables in this warehouse portion of the organization site, and the power went out in their entire building. And so it was dark in there immediately. And so the teaching artist called me and she said, this is what's happening. And I said, oh, of course, like we'll reschedule, we'll get this going for another time. And then I hung up with her, and a few seconds later, the program manager called me and she said, no, Erin, please don't let her leave. We're finding all the candles that we can. And somebody like opened the big garage door and moved their car around and shone the light into this warehouse so that they could continue with the visual arts project. And just in that moment, you could see that it wasn't just about learning to paint a tree and all of those good, aspects that brings as well, but that it really was in that mindfulness space of creating and enjoying that community and the mindfulness that they shared together. And so they all stayed for the whole 3 hours from 6:30 till 9:30, and the mood was wonderful. They were laughing and having such a good time with each other. And so I think that's one of the more powerful things we've seen as well. And also within that space, I was really thinking about, as you were talking, that, and I loved what you said too, Michael, about how in the end of the mindfulness exercise that we are centered in compassion. And I think that that is such an important aspect for us all to think about, and especially those who have endured trauma and they are existing or in the midst of their trauma, and they're existing in that hypervigilant state of protecting themselves and wanting to surround themselves with that shield so that they're not hurt in that way again. And so sometimes letting go and being centered like that, or not feeling defensive in ways, can be difficult. And so I think we always, work to create such a strong and healthy space within the arts disciplines. And we had a comment from one of our participants from a domestic violence shelter just a couple weeks ago. And as she was engaging in the visual arts, and her daughter was with her as well. And she said at the end, she said, wow, for a while there, I actually forgot where I was. And for her, the mindfulness was actually kind of in an opposite sense, in that though she was so present in what she was doing that she didn't have to think about the trauma around her. And that was that escape that will empower her as she keeps moving forward. And so yeah, it's an ever evolving program, and I'm always grateful for input. I love working with the Connect OC team and all of the amazing counselors and program managers that we work with over 30 organization partnerships, just to keep developing the program to best serve people. And my last thing, Spot, in regards to your comment as well, because that did obviously touch all of us, and that really touched my heart as well. And as we were at OC Pride last year, and there was a couple of churches there, and then they had signs, and they said, our God loves you, and you're welcome at our church for the LGBTQ community. And so I just want to share that with you, and that it doesn't always have to be a departure from religion, because spirituality and religion and all of those things, if we worked with Islamic centers, we worked with then Jewish communities, worked within Second Baptist Church, and having that element of faith is so overall really, really important for our mental health. And we share that with our LGBTQ communities that we work with. And one of them is we work with a group of students at Gilbert High School, which is an extenuation school, and they have a gay straight alliance group, and that was receiving a lot of bullying, and it had some suicidal idealization moments. And so we work with them twice a month, and it's one of the things I share with them too, is that there is acceptance. It's just finding it, and that it's out there. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing what you did.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Mike. We'll need to shift a little bit, but I did want to just touch on one thing that is I took away from something you were saying, Aaron. Well, first off, if you wouldn't mind, Aaron, sharing again your contact information in the chat for anybody who wants to connect with and see about bringing that program to their organization or their group or community group or whatever it might be, school, university. But just, I was thinking about there's this effect of trauma that often seems to rob us of our sense of self, our sense of others, our sense of community, of the world, whatever it might be. And there's something really powerful in mindful practice, in engaging in faith practices, and connecting in a mindful way with creativity, the arts, so on, that can restore this sense of self, restore this sense of others and the possibility of connecting with others in safe and meaningful ways, and a sense of connecting with the world again in meaningful ways, and from a place of security and safety. And so I love it. I love what you all are doing. Mike, I'm incredibly grateful for you to join us and for to share your experience with us. I always say this every time, but it's especially true for me today. I could keep going for another couple hours, but we don't have that much time. So I already pushed it as far as I could, but I'm really grateful for the both of you for participating. Um, Checking in with my team. Anything, any updates for us, any Connecto C updates we should be highlighting?
Yeah, thanks, David. Just as far as we're planning over here, we're planning a ton of resource fairs on a ton of different campuses, which we're so excited about. Um, Also, so we will have a few in the next couple of weeks. We'll have OC School of Arts. We'll be doing a small resource fair there for suicide prevention. We have Cypress College Walk of Hope coming up in a couple weeks. Thank you to those who are coming. And we also have Vanguard University's Wellness Fair that is the next week after that. So we are like up and running on that end. And then we also have a couple in the early planning stages. So the Cal State Fullerton Resource Fair in April, we'll be sending out invites shortly to our vendors. And then UC Irvine's Mental Wellness Fair in February, which we're early in planning stages. And we just sent out invites yesterday. So please respond to me if you can. But I think that's the only updates that I have on my end.
Thank you, Sarah. I also, a couple things I want to draw your attention to. One, I just put a link in the chat for if you have the opportunity, whether now or in a little bit, to complete the survey. It's how we make sure that what we're offering here is effective, it is meaningful, and we can adapt and grow. Moving on, also, I just want to connect with what you just said. So the annual AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Walk in partnership with HCA is happening tomorrow at Mike Ward Park in Irvine. What time is that at, Booman? Do you happen
Let me send you the flyer.
Okay,
I'm sorry. I have an urgent phone that's coming, so I'm kind of on standby.
No problem.
But this is actually, hang on 1 second. Sorry.
If anybody else too has any updates they'd like to share, any upcoming events, please feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to
No
share, this is a youth group. We were reached out by the ice hockey team of Cal State Fullerton. They had experienced a suicide there 2 weeks ago on their team, one of their team members. So again, this work is so urgent, so important. As we speak, this is happening. Somebody on their sports team, professional, clearly very highly accomplished and yet struggling with suicidal thoughts. So, brings meaning to our life, I think. And so I was kind of on standby for them, giving them sharing resources. And I'm going to encourage them to also participate in coalitions, seeing how else they can. But to answer your question, the walk is in Mike Ward Park. Registration starts 9 to 9:30, I believe. And then the walk will start at 10. Invite all of you to be there. I'll send you the flyers the minute I'm back from my assignment. So
Thank you, Bhuvana.
yeah,
Yes.
of course.
Great.
Thank you for that opportunity to quickly share that also.
Yes.
And great session, Mike. You did outstanding. I really learned a bunch of things today. So
Thank you, Bhuvana. Great event. Just I could say as somebody who's been to a couple of them, the AFSP walks, especially in partnership with HCA, fantastic event. Both for those of us who are concerned about mental health, those of us who have a loved one who has struggled with their mental health or suicidal ideation, those of us who have a loved one who is a survivor or who ourselves maybe are a survivor of suicide attempts, or for those of us who have lost a loved one to suicide, and everything in between. A fantastic place to encounter community and to do something really meaningful with our experiences. A couple of things I also want to highlight in the chat here. My mouse would start working. There we go. Spot, thank you. So Straight Talk got a community development block grant fund for low-income folks in Santa Ana to give free services. That is fantastic. So Straight Talk is offering free therapy sessions and flyers there, as well as a free grief workshop at their La Mirada site. So encourage you all to download those. Oh, also a teen anxiety group starting up. Man, you guys are doing a lot. Wow, that's fantastic. I love it. So drop-in anxiety workshop. Is that at the La Mirada site or Santa Ana?
That's in La Mirada. So
Perfect.
we have this teen anxiety workshop that's drop in, and it starts the 19th, but folks can come as needed, as wanted. And then we also have this grief and suicide prevention workshop in La Mirada. It's 2 sessions, and one is kind of like a remembrance in case folks have lost folks. I don't know if you all are aware, but like the City of La Mirada organization lost like 5 people to suicide in the last year. So as a sort of a gift and a thank you to the community that's hosted us for 40 years, we're offering this free workshop. So part of it is like tools to sort of do like mental health first aid on yourself and others. And then like another portion of it is just kind of remembrance, kind of breath work, sound bath, that kind of vibe.
I love it. As
Yeah.
a La Mirada High, as a La Mirada, somebody who grew up in La Mirada and a La Mirada High graduate, I'm really grateful that you all are doing this.
Yeah.
And
So for those of you who are unaware, we've had an in-kind arrangement with the city of La Mirada for 40 years, and
wow.
we've been over there in the resource center, and it's a really great opportunity for us because we get to use that fabulous facility, and they help us out with overhead and facility fees and all that kind of stuff. So it's been great for both us and the city. And if you have any clients that are in that area, or like even the north of Anaheim, Buena Park, we're able to serve those surrounding communities as well. It's not just limited to La Mirada. The only thing that I put in there that's limited to residency is we got that block grant funds for low income residents in Santa Ana. So if you have anyone in your network who could take advantage of that, please pass it along. I also have that available in Spanish, so I'll put that
Great.
in the chat as well.
Great. Thank you, Spot. Anybody else? Any other updates or anything else you'd like to share? Yvonne.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is information being shared with the schools? I just had a thought because every Friday my kids' school sends out a newsletter with just information, and sometimes they put stuff that's happening in the city, which is in Santa Ana. So I'm actually going to share this. So Spot, if you could put the Spanish one too, because it is a dual immersion school.
Yep.
Oh, I see it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be sharing that with them, but I was thinking there's
So in Santa Ana, if some of you all might be aware of this as community-based organizations in Santa Ana, the school uses Peach Jar to disseminate flyers. And Peach Jar is pretty expensive. So we did disseminate this flyer via Peach Jar, but we were only able to afford to give it to both intermediate schools and high schools. But it applies to, we can do talk therapy for kids ages 7 and up, and then folks all the way to adulthood at any stage. So, and then also for families as well. This is actually the version that's authorized to be distributed in Santa Ana. It has the Santa Ana school disclaimer on the bottom. So it's good for that.
Awesome, thank you. But I was just thinking also like this, and then just other information, maybe just have the direct email to the person or whoever the counselor is or whatever, and to add
I
it to
think
their.
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Yvonne, for the feedback. It's fantastic. Spot, thank you for updates on what you all are doing. If there's nothing else, folks, thank you for joining us. We'll be back. This is the first of our meetings at our new day. As you notice, we're at the same time and also on Friday 10 a.m., but it'll be the second Friday of the month moving forward. So our next meeting will be Friday, October 11th at 10 a.m., still here via Zoom. I'm really excited there. We're going to continue the topic of mindfulness. We're going to get more into mindfulness in the ways that, in some ways, the ways that we might be more familiar with it, what sometimes folks might call secular mindfulness or mindfulness-based stress reduction, something that Mike had mentioned earlier, as well as doing a little bit of dispelling some myths about mindfulness and talking a little bit about ways we can incorporate mindful awareness and mindful practice into our everyday lives, mindful eating, mindfully washing our hands, and so on. So, yes. And then, Mike, folks want to know if it was okay to distribute your email. So I'll leave that up to your discretion, if that's something you're comfortable with.
Sure, absolutely.
You can place it in the chat.
Let me put it in. Sure, I'll put it in the chat. Hold on.
Great. But once again, everyone, so grateful. Mike, so grateful to have you. Aaron, so grateful to have you. Yvonne, yes.
Yeah, one more question for Michelle. Where can we get your books? They sound amazing.
It's so funny. It's because of mindfulness that I was told to write all these books. So they're on digital. I can send the link. They're on I just put them on ebooks on some draft to digital. Let me see. I'll send it over to the team if they want to share it. But the one that I just started last night is my favorite. It's called Embracing Virtue. And it's a guide for, what traits to focus on in the world right now, especially for our youth, because a lot of them feel super confused morally. So yeah, but they all have the same underlying, they're non-secular, but they're leaning towards faith, increasing your self-worth, your self-esteem. And I'm literally teaching law of attraction through gratitude, but in a way that it's about self-empowerment and your own spirituality, your own relationship with, whoever you consider your higher power, which could be you too. So yeah, it's been really fun. I feel that we're living in a historic time, and it's up for all of us to work together right now to help usher in a brighter world for our youth.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Yvonne, for asking that question. Great question. Michelle, thank you for being willing to share those with us. We can you send me the link and send it out as part of our
thank you
summary email.
And we're also happy to bring School of Gratitude to any of your organizations. It's a 6-week in-person program, no phones allowed, 12 people in circle. We have little cushions, and we make all sorts of cognitive behavioral tools related to the curriculum.
Great.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I want to be mindful of time. I'm really grateful to you again, Mike and Aaron and everyone who participated today. I know some folks already had to jump off. We're about 7 minutes over our usual time. So I want to give you all respect your time, but thank you all for joining us and look forward to seeing you in October. Take care, everyone.